The sky bled crimson as the sun sank into the jagged horizon of the Montana plains. A bitter wind howled across the grasslands, bending the tall stalks in waves, as if the earth itself were trembling. In the heart of this vast, untamed sea of grass stood a solitary figure, a massive buffalo bull, his silhouette a mountain against the dying light. His name, whispered by the winds and carried by the stories of the plains, was Iron. His hide was a tapestry of scars, each one a testament to battles fought and survived, but his dark eyes gleamed with something deeper, a quiet, resolute sorrow that seemed to hold the weight of the world. Iron's hooves sank into the soft earth as he stood over a small, trembling form, a buffalo calf, barely a month old, its flank torn and bleeding from a vicious encounter with a pack of coyotes. The calf's mother lay still a few paces away, her body cold, her sacrifice the only reason the calf still drew breath. Iron's massive head lowered, his warm breath clouding in the chill air as he nudged the calf gently, urging it to rise. The calf whimpered, its tiny body shivering, but Iron did not move. He stood like a sentinel, his bulk shielding the little one from the wind, his gaze scanning the darkening plains for the predators that would surely return. The coyotes had been bold, driven by hunger and the scent of weakness. They had struck at dusk, their yips and snarls shattering the peace of the herd's grazing. Iron had been grazing at the edge of the herd, his massive frame a deterrent to most threats. But the coyotes had sensed an opportunity in the calf's inexperience and the mother's faltering strength. The fight had been brutal, teeth against horn, speed against power. Iron had driven them off, his hooves thundering like war drums, but not before the mother fell. Now, as the stars began to pierce the sky, Iron faced a choice that weighed heavier than any battle: to stay with the calf, risking his own life against the returning pack, or to lead the herd to safety, abandoning the helpless creature to its fate. The plains stretched endlessly around them, a sea of gold and green under the fading light. The air carried the scent of sage and dust, mingled with the faint tang of blood. In the distance, the silhouette of a lone cottonwood tree stood against the horizon, its branches twisted like the fingers of an ancient storyteller. This was Iron's world, a place of raw beauty and unrelenting danger, where survival demanded strength but also something rarer: compassion. Iron was no ordinary buffalo. He was old, older than most of his kind, and his life had been marked by choices that set him apart. Years ago he had been cast out from his herd, deemed too defiant, too unwilling to bow to the lead bull's dominance. He had wandered alone, surviving blizzards and wolves, until he found this herd, a family not of blood but of choice. Now, that family was scattered, fleeing in panic, and Iron stood alone once more, tethered to a calf that was not his own. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he caught the scent of the coyotes on the wind. They were close, circling, waiting for the moment he faltered. Iron's ears twitched, his muscles tensing beneath his shaggy hide. He could run, could rejoin the herd and leave the calf to its fate. It was the way of the plains, survival of the strongest. But Iron's heart, vast as the land itself, refused to turn away. He had seen too much loss, felt too much pain, to abandon the calf now. His eyes, deep and soulful, lingered on the tiny creature, its breaths shallow but stubborn. In that moment, Iron made his choice. He would stand, he would fight, and he would protect, even if it cost him everything. Miles away, in a weathered cabin nestled at the edge of the plains, a woman named Clara sat by a flickering lantern, her hands trembling as she stitched a torn jacket. Clara was a rancher, a solitary figure hardened by years of battling the elements and the isolation of the frontier. Her face was etched with lines of grief, her eyes carrying the weight of a loss she never spoke of, a son, taken by a fever 2 winters past. She had seen the herd pass by her land countless times, their thunderous hooves a reminder of the life that pulsed beyond her fences. But tonight, something was different. She had heard the coyotes' cries, sharp and frenzied, and seen the herd scatter in the distance. Curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, pulled her to her feet. She grabbed her rifle and stepped into the night, her breath visible in the cold air. Clara's land bordered the Great Plains, a patchwork of grazing fields and wild grasses where the buffalo roamed free. She had always respected them, even admired their strength, but she kept her distance. They were wild, unpredictable, and she had learned long ago that the wild took more than it gave. Yet, as she trudged through the grass, her boots sinking into the earth, she felt a strange pull, a sense that something extraordinary was unfolding in the darkness. She crested a low rise and froze. There, illuminated by the faint glow of the moon, stood Iron. His massive form was unmistakable, his head lowered protectively over the calf. The coyote's eyes glinted in the shadows, their forms slinking closer, testing Iron's resolve. Clara's grip tightened on her rifle, but she didn't raise it. Something in Iron's stance, in the way he shielded the calf, stopped her. She saw not a beast, but a guardian, a creature bound by a loyalty she hadn't thought possible in the wild. Her heart, long hardened by loss, stirred with a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: awe. Iron's breath came in steady huffs as he faced the coyotes. There were 5 of them now, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. They moved with calculated precision, spreading out to flank him, their hunger a palpable force. The calf whimpered again, trying to stand but collapsing under its own weight. Iron's tail flicked, a warning to the predators, but his eyes never left them. He knew this dance, had fought it many times before. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't fighting for himself. The lead coyote lunged, a blur of teeth and fur, aiming for the calf. Iron reacted with a speed that belied his size, his head swinging low, his horns catching the coyote mid-air and sending it tumbling into the grass. The others hesitated, their growls rising into a chorus of frustration. Iron stamped his hoof, the sound echoing like a challenge, and the coyotes retreated a few paces, regrouping. But they wouldn't leave. Not yet. Clara watched, her breath catching in her throat. She had seen buffalo fight before, had witnessed their raw power, but this was something else. Iron wasn't just defending territory or asserting dominance. He was protecting something fragile, something that couldn't survive without him. She lowered her rifle, her hands shaking not from cold but from the realization that she was witnessing something sacred. For the first time in years, Clara felt a connection to the world beyond her grief, a world where even a beast could choose love over survival. The wind picked up, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. A storm was coming, its dark clouds gathering over the plains. Iron's ears flicked toward the sound, but he didn't move. The calf needed him, and the coyotes were still there, waiting for their moment. Clara took a step closer, her boots crunching softly in the grass. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to stay, to bear witness, to help if she could. But what could she do against the wild? As the first drops of rain began to fall, Iron let out a low, resonant bellow, a sound that seemed to shake the very earth. The coyotes froze, their ears flattening. Clara's heart raced. The storm was closing in, the coyotes were circling, and Iron stood alone, a titan against the gathering dark. The calf stirred, its tiny hoof scraping the ground, as if answering Iron's call. And in that moment, Clara knew she couldn't walk away. What would happen when the storm broke? Would Iron's strength be enough to hold back the predators and the elements? And what did it mean for a woman like Clara, who had long since closed her heart, to stand on the edge of such a moment? Follow the journey of Iron and Clara to discover how love and courage can bridge the divide between wild and human hearts. Share this story with others who believe in the power of connection, and let us know. What moment in your life reminded you of the strength found in sacrifice? The rain came down in sheets, turning the Montana plains into a shimmering, treacherous expanse. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating Iron's massive form as he stood resolute over the trembling buffalo calf. The wind howled, whipping his shaggy mane against his scarred hide, but his eyes burned with unyielding determination. The coyotes, emboldened by the storm's chaos, slunk closer, their forms ghostly in the downpour. Their yips cut through the roar of the rain, a taunting chorus that promised no mercy. Iron's hooves sank deeper into the muddy earth, his breath steaming in the cold, but he did not waver. The calf, barely clinging to life, pressed against his leg, its tiny body shivering under the relentless deluge. Iron's heart thundered, not from fear but from the weight of his choice. The herd was gone, scattered into the storm's embrace, their hoofbeats swallowed by the wind. He could have followed, could have sought safety in their numbers, but the calf, small, broken, and alone, had rooted him to this spot. Its eyes, wide and trusting, mirrored a pain Iron knew too well, the ache of loss, the fragility of hope. He had seen it in his own reflection years ago, when he wandered the plains alone, cast out and forsaken. That memory, raw and unhealed, fueled his resolve. He would not let this calf become another scar on his soul. The lead coyote darted forward, its teeth bared, aiming for the calf's exposed flank. Iron reacted with a fury born of desperation, his massive head swinging low, horns slicing through the air. The coyote yelped as it tumbled into the mud, but another took its place, snapping at Iron's hind leg. Pain flared as teeth grazed his flesh, but Iron spun, his hoof connecting with the predator's side, sending it sprawling. The others circled, their eyes glinting like stars in the storm, waiting for him to tire. Iron bellowed, a sound that rivaled the thunder, a warning that he would fight until his last breath. Clara crouched behind a cluster of sagebrush, her rifle slick with rain, her heart pounding in her chest. The storm had turned the plains into a battlefield, and Iron was its lone warrior. She had never seen anything like it, a beast so fierce yet so tender, risking everything for a calf that wasn't his. Her fingers tightened on the rifle, torn between instinct and awe. She could shoot, could scatter the coyotes with a single blast, but something held her back. Iron's fight wasn't just about survival, it was a testament, a defiance of the cruel indifference of the wild. To interfere felt like violating something sacred. Clara's mind flickered to her son, to the fever that had stolen him in the dead of winter. She had fought for him, sat by his side through endless nights, whispering promises she couldn't keep. The memory was a knife, twisting in her chest. She had closed herself off since then, building walls of solitude to shield her from further pain. But watching Iron, seeing his unwavering resolve, cracked those walls. He wasn't just a buffalo, he was a mirror, reflecting a strength she had buried deep. A flash of lightning revealed a new threat. The coyotes weren't alone. In the distance, a larger shadow moved through the grass. A mountain lion, drawn by the scent of blood and the chaos of the storm. Its eyes glowed like twin moons, its body low and sleek, a predator far more deadly than the coyotes. Clara's breath caught. Iron was strong, but a mountain lion was a different kind of danger, one that could bring down even a titan like him. She raised her rifle, her hands steady despite the rain, but hesitated. Would Iron see her as a threat? Would her intervention doom the calf he was fighting so hard to protect? Iron sensed the new presence before he saw it. The air shifted, carrying the sharp, musky scent of the mountain lion. His ears flicked, his muscles tensing as he scanned the darkness. The coyotes, sensing the greater predator, faltered, their circling slowing. Iron's gaze locked onto the lion's silhouette, its form a deadly promise against the storm-lit sky. The calf whimpered, its tiny body pressing closer, and Iron's resolve hardened. He lowered his head, horns gleaming with rain, ready to face this new foe. But the storm had other plans. A deafening crack split the air as lightning struck the lone cottonwood tree in the distance, its branches erupting in flames. The fire was small, smothered quickly by the rain, but the shock sent the coyotes scattering, their yips fading into the night. The mountain lion hesitated, its ears flattening, then turned and vanished into the grass. Iron stood frozen, his chest heaving, the calf still sheltered beneath him. The immediate danger had passed, but the storm was far from over, and the plains were merciless. Clara lowered her rifle, her heart racing. The lightning had bought Iron a moment of reprieve, but she knew the predators would return. She stepped forward, her boots sinking into the mud, driven by a need she couldn't name. "Come on, big fella," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You can't do this alone." Iron's head snapped toward her, his eyes meeting hers through the downpour. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Clara saw no fear in his gaze, only a fierce, unyielding determination, and something else, a flicker of recognition, as if he understood her presence, her intent. She took another step, her hand outstretched, not to harm but to offer. Iron snorted, his breath a cloud of steam, but he didn't move. The calf stirred, its tiny hoof scraping the mud, and Clara's heart clenched. She had to help, but how? The storm raged on, the rain turning the ground into a quagmire. Iron's strength was waning, his flank bleeding from the coyote's bite, but he stood firm. The calf tried to rise again, its legs wobbling, and Iron nudged it gently, urging it to stay down, to conserve its strength. The plains were a place of survival, but Iron's actions were more than instinct. They were a choice, a vow to protect the helpless, to defy the cruel arithmetic of nature. Clara, soaked to the bone, made a decision. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and pulled a tarp from her pack, a makeshift shelter she used for her own treks. She moved slowly, her eyes locked on Iron's, speaking softly. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm. "Let me help." She draped the tarp over a low bush, creating a small canopy near Iron. It wasn't much, but it would shield the calf from the worst of the rain. Iron watched, his ears twitching, his body tense but still. Clara knelt beside the calf, her hands gentle as she examined its wounds. The gash was deep, but not fatal if treated. She pulled a small first aid kit from her pack, her movements careful, aware of Iron's watchful gaze. The calf flinched as she cleaned the wound, but Iron's presence seemed to calm it, his low rumbles a steady reassurance. As Clara worked, a new sound pierced the storm, the distant hum of an engine. Headlights flickered through the rain, a truck bouncing across the uneven terrain. Clara's heart sank. It was likely one of the local ranchers, men who saw the buffalo as a threat to their cattle, their land. They wouldn't understand Iron's fight, wouldn't see the heart behind his strength. She glanced at Iron, then at the approaching lights, her mind racing. She had to protect them, but how could she stand against her own kind? The truck stopped 100 yards away, its headlights cutting through the rain. A figure stepped out, a man's silhouette against the glare. Clara stood, placing herself between Iron and the newcomer, her hand resting on her rifle. Iron's head lowered, his horns gleaming, ready to defend the calf against this new threat. The storm roared, the night alive with danger, and Clara knew the next moments would test them all. What would the newcomer bring, help or harm? Could Clara bridge the gap between human and wild, or would Iron's fight end in tragedy? And what of the calf, clinging to life in the heart of the storm? Join Iron and Clara as their paths collide in a tale of courage and connection. Share this story with those who believe in the power of unlikely bonds, and tell us, when have you faced a choice between fear and compassion? The rain pounded the earth, a relentless curtain that blurred the world into shades of gray. Iron stood like a monolith, his massive frame shielding the buffalo calf from the storm's fury. The calf, weak but stubborn, huddled beneath him, its shallow breaths a faint rhythm against the roar of the wind. Clara knelt nearby, her tarp flapping wildly under the makeshift shelter, her hands stained with the calf's blood as she bandaged its wound. Her eyes darted between Iron's watchful gaze and the approaching figure from the truck, a man's silhouette cutting through the headlights' glare. The air crackled with tension, as if the storm itself held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Iron's ears flicked, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of gun oil and leather. His muscles tensed, his horns lowered, ready to charge if the newcomer posed a threat. The coyotes had vanished into the night, driven off by the lightning and the mountain lion's brief appearance, but this human was a different kind of danger, one Iron couldn't predict. His dark eyes locked onto Clara, searching for a sign of her intent. She had helped the calf, her touch gentle, her voice soft, but humans were fickle. Iron had seen their kind before, some offered kindness, others brought death. His scars burned with the memory of a trapper's blade, a wound that had nearly ended him years ago. Yet Clara's presence, her quiet determination, stirred something in him, a flicker of trust, fragile as the calf's life. Clara stood, her body a shield between Iron and the approaching man. Her rifle hung at her side, unraised but ready, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She recognized the man's outline, Tom Haskell, a neighboring rancher known for his quick temper and quicker trigger. Tom had no love for the buffalo, seeing them as a threat to his cattle, a nuisance that trampled his fences and grazed his land. Clara had clashed with him before, her solitary life at odds with his aggressive expansion. She knew he wouldn't see Iron's stand as anything but a challenge. "Clara." Tom's voice cut through the storm, gruff and impatient. "What the hell are you doing out here? That beast'll kill you." He stepped closer, his boots sloshing in the mud, a shotgun cradled in his arms. The headlights cast his shadow long and jagged, like a predator's claw. "Stay back, Tom," Clara called, her voice steady despite the rain streaming down her face. "He's protecting that calf. He's not a threat unless you make him one." Tom snorted, his eyes narrowing as he took in Iron's massive form. "Protecting? It's a damn buffalo, Clara. They don't protect, they charge. Step aside before you get trampled." Iron snorted, his hoof pawing the ground, sending a spray of mud into the air. The calf whimpered, its tiny body pressing closer to Iron's leg. Clara's heart clenched. She saw the fear in the calf's eyes, the trust in Iron's stance, and something inside her snapped into focus. She had lost too much to let this moment slip away, to let Tom's fear destroy something extraordinary. "Tom, listen to me," she said, stepping forward, her hand raised but not touching her rifle. "This buffalo's doing something you and I can barely understand. He's risking his life for that calf. You shoot him, you're not just killing an animal, you're killing something bigger. Something we don't see every day." Tom's jaw tightened, his grip on the shotgun unwavering. "You're out of your mind, woman. That thing's dangerous, and you're standing there like it's some kind of hero. Move, or I'll move you." Iron's head lowered further, his breath a low rumble, a warning that echoed through the storm. Clara felt the weight of the moment, the fragile balance between life and death. She could step aside, let Tom take the shot, and walk away unscathed. It was the safe choice, the one her hardened heart had made 100 times since her son's death. But Iron's eyes, deep and soulful, held her in place. They spoke of a pain she knew, a loyalty she had forgotten. She couldn't turn away. The storm surged, a gust of wind tearing the tarp from its mooring, sending it flapping into the darkness. Lightning illuminated the plains, casting Iron and the calf in stark relief against the roiling sky. Clara's mind raced. She needed to buy time, to protect Iron and the calf, but Tom's finger was already on the trigger. She took a step closer to him, her hands outstretched, her voice rising above the wind. "Tom, you lost your brother to a stampede," she said, her words sharp and deliberate. "You know what it's like to lose family. That calf's all that buffalo's got left. You take that away, you're no better than the storm tearing this place apart." Tom's face twisted, a flash of pain crossing his features. His brother had died years ago, trampled in a chaotic buffalo stampede during a cattle drive. It was a wound he carried like a badge, fueling his hatred for the herds. Clara's words cut deep, and for a moment his shotgun wavered. But the moment passed, and his eyes hardened again. "Don't you dare bring him into this," he growled. "You think you can guilt me into letting that beast live? I'm protecting my land, my livelihood." Iron's bellow cut through the argument, a sound so deep it seemed to shake the earth. The calf, spurred by some inner strength, struggled to its feet, its legs wobbling but holding. Iron nudged it gently, urging it to stay close, his eyes never leaving Tom. Clara saw the shift in Iron's stance, the way his muscles coiled, ready to charge if Tom raised the gun. She had to act, had to find a way to bridge the chasm between them. "Tom, look at them," she said, her voice softer now, pleading. "That buffalo's not fighting for himself. He's fighting for that calf, the same way you'd fight for your own. You want to protect your land? Then protect this, too. This is what makes the plains worth saving." Tom's eyes flicked to Iron, then to the calf, its tiny form dwarfed by the bull's massive bulk. For the first time, doubt crept into his expression. The storm roared, the rain blinding, but in that moment, the world narrowed to the four of them. Iron, the calf, Clara, and Tom, bound by a choice that would define them all. Then, a new sound broke the tension, a low, guttural growl from the darkness. The mountain lion was back, its eyes glowing through the rain, closer now, drawn by the calf's blood and the standoff. Iron's head snapped toward the sound, his body shifting to face the new threat. The calf stumbled, its strength fading, and Clara's heart sank. Tom raised his shotgun, his eyes darting between Iron and the lion, uncertainty etched on his face. Clara seized the moment. "Tom, help me get the calf to safety," she said, her voice urgent. "We can't fight that lion here, not in this storm. If you want to protect your land, help me save them." Tom hesitated, his shotgun still raised, but the lion's growl grew louder, its shadow moving closer. Iron stamped his hoof, his bellow a challenge to both the lion and Tom. The calf wobbled, its legs giving out, and Clara lunged to support it, her arms wrapping around its trembling body. She looked at Tom, her eyes fierce with a fire she hadn't felt in years. "Make a choice, Tom," she said. "Be the man who destroys, or the one who saves." The lion's roar split the night, and Iron charged toward the sound, his horns lowered, his body a force of nature. Clara held the calf, her heart pounding, as Tom stood frozen, the storm raging around them. Would he shoot, or would he help? And could Iron hold off the lion long enough for any of them to survive? Follow Iron and Clara as they face the storm and the choices that will shape their fates. Share this story with those who believe in the power of redemption, and tell us, when have you stood at a crossroads between fear and courage? The mountain lion's growl sliced through the storm's roar, a low, primal threat that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. Its eyes burned like twin fires in the beam of her flashlight, its sleek form crouched low in the sodden grass. Iron stood resolute, his massive bulk a wall between the calf and the predator, his horns glinting with rain as he lowered his head. The buffalo calf, barely upright, leaned against Iron's leg, its blanket sodden and slipping, its breaths ragged but defiant. Clara's heart pounded as she gripped her rifle, her fingers numb from the cold. Tom, a few paces behind, raised his shotgun, his face pale in the flickering light of the storm. The Montana plains stretched around them, a vast, rain-soaked battlefield where the rules of survival were written in blood. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the lion's taut muscles, its claws digging into the mud. Iron's bellow shook the air, a challenge that seemed to hold the storm itself at bay. Clara knew this moment was a fulcrum, life or death hung in the balance, not just for the calf but for all of them. She glanced at Tom, his eyes locked on the lion, his shotgun steady but his expression torn. He could end this with a single shot, but at what cost? Iron's stand was more than instinct, it was a choice, one that Clara felt echoing in her own heart. "Tom, don't shoot," she said, her voice sharp over the wind. "Not yet. Let him try." Tom's head snapped toward her, incredulity etched on his face. "You're betting our lives on a buffalo? That lion'll tear through him and us next." "He's protecting that calf," Clara shot back, her eyes never leaving Iron. "Give him a chance. He's earned it." Tom's jaw clenched, but he didn't fire. The lion took a step forward, its tail flicking, testing Iron's resolve. The buffalo snorted, his hoof pawing the mud, sending a spray into the air. The calf whimpered, its legs trembling, and Iron's massive head swung gently, nudging it to stay close. Clara's breath caught. She saw the pain in Iron's flank, the blood mixing with the rain, but his eyes held a fire that no storm could extinguish. He was a titan, scarred and weary, yet unyielding in his purpose. Iron felt the lion's presence like a weight on his soul. The coyotes had been a threat he could outlast, but this predator was different, swift, silent, and deadly. His wound throbbed, a constant reminder of his fading strength, but the calf's warmth against his leg anchored him. He had faced death before, had walked the plains alone after his herd cast him out, surviving blizzards and starvation. Those trials had forged him, but this was something more. The calf wasn't just a life to save, it was a promise, a defiance of the loss that had haunted him since his exile. He would not let it fall. The lion lunged, a blur of muscle and claws, aiming for the calf. Iron reacted with a speed that belied his size, his horns sweeping low, catching the lion's shoulder and forcing it to veer off. The predator landed lightly, its growl rising into a snarl, but Iron didn't hesitate. He charged, his hooves thundering, driving the lion back into the grass. The calf stumbled, nearly collapsing, and Clara darted forward, catching it before it fell. She pulled the blanket tighter, her hands shaking as she shielded the tiny creature from the rain. "Easy, little one," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. She glanced at Iron, locked in a deadly dance with the lion, his massive form a whirlwind of power. The lion circled, its eyes never leaving Iron, searching for an opening. Clara's mind raced. They needed to move, to get the calf to Tom's barn, but the lion wouldn't let them go so easily. Tom stepped forward, his shotgun raised, his voice tight. "Clara, we can't wait. That lion's not backing down." "Then help me move the calf," Clara snapped, her eyes blazing. "We're not leaving them." Tom hesitated, his gaze flicking between the lion and Iron. The buffalo's bellow rang out again, a sound that seemed to shake the very earth, and for a moment, Tom's expression softened. He saw what Clara saw, not just a beast, but a guardian, a creature fighting for something greater than itself. He slung his shotgun over his shoulder and knelt beside Clara, helping her lift the calf. Its weight was slight, but its trembling body was a reminder of how fragile this moment was. Iron felt the humans' movement behind him, sensed their intent to protect the calf. The woman, Clara, was a mystery. Her actions spoke of trust, a rare thing in his world. The man with the gun was less certain, his scent sharp with fear and anger, but he hadn't fired. Iron's focus returned to the lion, its eyes locked on his, its body coiled for another strike. The storm raged, the rain blinding, but Iron's senses were sharp, honed by years of survival. He knew the lion's next move before it made it. The predator sprang, aiming for Iron's wounded flank, but Iron was ready. He twisted, his horns catching the lion's side, sending it tumbling into the mud. The lion roared, scrambling to its feet, but Iron pressed forward, his massive bulk a force of nature. The lion retreated, its tail lashing, but it didn't flee. It would wait, biding its time, and Iron knew his strength wouldn't hold forever. Clara and Tom moved quickly, supporting the calf between them as they trudged through the mud toward the truck. The barn was still a mile away, a daunting distance in the storm, but it was their only hope. Clara's flashlight bobbed, its beam cutting through the rain, guiding their path. Iron followed, his eyes never leaving the lion's shadow in the grass. He kept himself between the calf and the predator, his steps deliberate, his wounds forgotten in the heat of his purpose. As they reached the truck, Clara opened the tailgate, her hands slipping on the wet metal. "We can't fit the big one," Tom said, glancing at Iron. "He'll have to follow on foot." Clara nodded, her heart heavy. She knew Iron wouldn't leave the calf, but the journey would test him beyond his limits. She helped Tom lift the calf into the truck's bed, securing it with the blanket and rope. The little one's eyes fluttered, its breaths weak but steady, and Clara felt a surge of hope. "Hang on," she whispered, brushing its damp fur. "We're not giving up on you." Iron stood at the truck's edge, his massive head lowered, his eyes meeting Clara's. For a moment, the storm seemed to fade, and there was only the connection between them, a silent understanding, a shared resolve. Clara climbed into the truck's bed, kneeling beside the calf, while Tom took the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, the headlights piercing the rain, and they began the slow, treacherous drive toward the barn. But as the truck lurched forward, a chilling roar echoed from the darkness. The mountain lion was following, its eyes glinting in the rearview mirror. Iron turned, his bellow answering the predator's challenge, his hooves sinking into the mud as he prepared to hold his ground. Clara's heart stopped. The barn was close, but the lion was closer, and Iron was running out of time. Would they reach the barn before the lion struck again? Could Iron's strength endure, or would the plains claim them all? And what would Clara and Tom sacrifice to protect this fragile life? Join Iron, Clara, and Tom as they race against the storm and the predator stalking them. Share this story with those who believe in the power of sacrifice, and tell us, when have you fought for something against all odds? The truck lurched through the mud, its tires slipping on the rain-soaked plains as the storm raged without mercy. Clara crouched in the truck bed, her hands steadying the buffalo calf, its tiny body wrapped in a sodden blanket. The calf's breaths were faint, its eyes half closed, but it clung to life with a stubbornness that mirrored Iron's own. Outside, Iron trudged alongside, his massive hooves sinking into the mire, his scarred hide glistening with rain. His wound bled freely now, a dark streak against his flank, but his eyes burned with a fierce resolve. The mountain lion's roar echoed behind them, a chilling promise that the predator was not done hunting. Clara's flashlight beam danced across the darkness, illuminating Iron's steady gait and the glint of the lion's eyes in the distance. The barn was close, its silhouette loomed against the storm-lit sky, a beacon of hope in the endless sea of grass. But the mile felt like a lifetime, each moment stretched taut by the threat trailing them. Tom gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his gaze flicking between the muddy path and the rearview mirror. "That lion's still out there," he muttered, his voice tight. "And that buffalo's slowing us down." "He's keeping the calf alive," Clara snapped, her hands gentle on the calf's trembling form. "If he stops, we lose them both." Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He'd seen Iron stand against the lion, the way the buffalo had placed himself between danger and the calf. It was a sight that challenged everything he'd believed about the wild. A beast acting not out of instinct, but something deeper, something almost human. Yet years of loss and frustration warred within him, his hatred for the buffalo herds clashing with the grudging respect Iron's actions demanded. Iron's bellow cut through the storm, a low, resonant challenge that vibrated in Clara's chest. She glanced back, her heart lurching as she saw the lion's shadow moving closer, its form a sleek blur in the rain. Iron slowed, turning to face the predator, his horns lowered, his body a wall of defiance. The truck lurched again, nearly stalling, and Clara cursed under her breath. "Tom, keep moving," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I'm trying." Tom yelled back, wrestling with the wheel. The barn was just ahead, its weathered doors barely visible through the downpour. But the lion was gaining, its eyes locked on Iron, sensing his weakening strength. Iron felt the weight of his wounds, the ache in his limbs, the blood seeping into the mud. The plains had always been a crucible, testing his strength, his will, his heart. He had survived exile, hunger, and the blades of men, but this fight was different. The calf, small and fragile, was a tether to a purpose he hadn't known he carried. A need to protect, to preserve something beyond himself. The lion's growl was a reminder of the plains' brutal law, but Iron was no stranger to defiance. He had chosen this fight, and he would see it through. The lion lunged, its claws slashing through the air, aiming for Iron's wounded flank. He spun, his horns catching the predator's shoulder, forcing it back. The lion snarled, circling, its movements fluid and relentless. Iron's breath came in heavy huffs, his strength ebbing, but he held his ground, his eyes never leaving the lion. The calf's faint whimper reached him, a sound that steeled his resolve. He would not let it fall. Clara watched, her heart in her throat, as Iron faced the lion alone. She wanted to scream, to fire her rifle, to do anything to help, but she knew Iron's fight was his own. She focused on the calf, checking its bandages, her hands steady despite the chaos. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's fighting for you." The truck hit a rut, jolting Clara and the calf. Tom cursed, fighting to keep control, the barn now tantalizingly close. "We're almost there," he shouted, his voice edged with desperation. Clara nodded, her eyes flicking to Iron. The buffalo was a titan in the storm, his massive form a beacon of strength, but she saw the cost, the blood, the faltering steps, the weight of his sacrifice. As the truck reached the barn, Tom slammed on the brakes, the vehicle sliding to a stop in the mud. Clara leaped from the bed, her boots splashing as she ran to the barn doors, shoving them open with a grunt. The interior was dark, smelling of hay and old wood, a dry refuge from the storm's wrath. "Tom, help me get the calf inside," she called, her voice urgent. Tom hesitated, his eyes on Iron and the lion, now locked in a deadly standoff. The buffalo's bellows were weaker now, his movements slower, but he held his ground, keeping the lion at bay. Tom's hand twitched toward his shotgun, but Clara's glare stopped him. "The calf, Tom," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Together, they lifted the calf from the truck, its body limp but warm. Clara cradled it as they stumbled into the barn, laying it gently on a bed of straw. The calf's eyes fluttered open, meeting Clara's, and she felt a surge of hope. It was still fighting, just like Iron. She grabbed a lantern from a hook, its flickering light casting shadows across the barn's walls. "Stay with it," she told Tom, already turning back to the door. "I'm going for Iron." As Iron crossed the threshold, his hooves clattering on the wooden floor, Clara felt a surge of relief. The barn's walls shielded them from the storm's wrath, the lantern's light a warm contrast to the chaos outside. Iron lowered himself beside the calf, his massive body curling protectively around it, his breath steadying as he nudged the little one gently. The calf stirred, its eyes opening, meeting Iron's with a trust that brought tears to Clara's eyes. Tom lowered his shotgun, his gaze softening as he watched the scene. "Never thought I'd see something like this," he muttered, almost to himself. "A buffalo acting like family." Clara knelt beside the calf, checking its wound, her hands gentle. "He is family," she said quietly. "He chose to be." The barn was a fragile sanctuary, its walls creaking under the storm's assault. Clara knew the lion was still out there, waiting for its chance, and Iron's wounds needed more than her makeshift bandages. She looked at Tom, her voice firm. "We need to call a vet. Someone who can help them both." Tom hesitated, his old prejudices flaring, but the sight of Iron and the calf silenced his objections. He nodded, pulling a radio from his belt. "I know a guy. Works with wildlife. He's a few hours out, but I'll get him here." Clara's heart lifted, but the moment was shattered by a chilling roar from outside. The lion was back, its shadow moving across the barn's open doors. Iron struggled to rise, his wounds slowing him, but his bellow was as fierce as ever, a warning to the predator that he wasn't done fighting. Clara grabbed her rifle, standing between Iron and the door, her eyes blazing with determination. Tom joined her, his shotgun ready, their differences forgotten in the face of the threat. The lion's eyes glowed in the darkness, its growl a challenge that echoed Iron's own. The storm raged on, the barn a fragile bastion against the wild's fury. Could Clara and Tom hold off the lion long enough for help to arrive? Would Iron's strength endure, or would the plains claim its due? Follow Iron, Clara, and Tom as they stand together against the wild's wrath. Share this story with those who believe in the power of unity, and tell us, when have you found strength in an unlikely alliance? The barn creaked under the storm's relentless assault, its wooden walls shuddering as the wind howled across the Montana plains. Inside, the lantern's flickering light cast long shadows, illuminating Iron's massive form curled protectively around the buffalo calf. The calf's breaths were shallow but steady, its tiny body pressed against Iron's warmth, a fragile spark of life in the chaos of the night. Clara stood at the barn door, her rifle gripped tightly, her eyes locked on the mountain lion's glowing gaze just beyond the threshold. Tom flanked her, his shotgun raised, his face etched with a mix of fear and determination. The lion's growl rumbled like distant thunder, a promise of violence that hung heavy in the air. Iron's wounds bled into the straw, his strength waning, but his eyes burned with an unyielding fire. Each labored breath was a vow, to protect the calf, to defy the wild's brutal law. The lion's presence was a blade at his throat, but Iron's heart was anchored to the calf, to the trust in its eyes, to the choice he'd made under the storm's wrath. He shifted, his massive head rising, horns glinting in the lantern's glow, ready to stand if the predator struck. Clara's pulse raced, her body taut as she faced the lion. The rain pounded the earth outside, turning the ground into a quagmire, but the barn was a fragile fortress, its walls a thin barrier against the wild. She glanced at Iron, his resolve a mirror to her own. She had lost so much, her son, her hope, but Iron's fight had rekindled something within her, a fire she thought had died. She wouldn't let him fall, not now, not after all he'd given. "Tom, keep that door covered," she said, her voice low but firm. "The vet's coming, but we need to hold that lion off." Tom nodded, his shotgun steady, though his eyes betrayed his doubt. "If that thing gets in here, we're done," he muttered. "And that buffalo's in no shape to fight." "He'll fight," Clara said, her gaze never leaving the lion. "He's been fighting all night." The lion paced just beyond the barn's entrance, its sleek form a shadow in the rain. Its eyes locked onto Iron, sensing his weakness, but Clara's presence and Tom's shotgun kept it at bay. For now. The predator's tail flicked, its growl a low, constant threat. Clara's mind raced. The vet was hours away, and Iron's wounds needed immediate care. She glanced at the first aid kit beside the calf, its contents meager but better than nothing. "Tom, I need you to help me with Iron," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We've got to stop his bleeding." Tom's eyes widened. "You want me to patch up a buffalo? Clara, you're out of your damn mind." "Maybe," she said, a faint smile breaking through her tension. "But he's why we're here. Help me, or we lose them both." Tom hesitated, his old prejudices flaring, but the sight of Iron, bloodied, defiant, curled around the calf, silenced his objections. He set his shotgun against the wall, grabbing the first aid kit. "Fine," he grumbled. "But if he charges, I'm not sticking around." Clara knelt beside Iron, her hands gentle as she examined his wounds. The lion's claws had torn deep gashes in his flank, and the coyote's bite still oozed blood. Iron's eyes followed her, calm but watchful, as if he understood her intent. She spoke softly, her voice a soothing thread in the storm's chaos. "Easy, big fella. We're going to fix you up." Tom handed her antiseptic and gauze, his movements stiff but precise. Clara worked quickly, cleaning the wounds, her hands steady despite the lion's growls outside. Iron flinched but didn't move, his trust in her a weight she felt in her bones. Tom watched, his skepticism fading as he saw the buffalo's stillness, its quiet acceptance of their help. "Never thought I'd be playing doctor to a buffalo," he muttered, a grudging respect in his voice. Outside, the lion's patience wore thin. It lunged toward the door, its snarl echoing through the barn. Clara's head snapped up, her rifle in hand before she could think. Tom grabbed his shotgun, positioning himself at the entrance. "Stay back," he shouted, firing a warning shot into the mud just outside. The lion hissed, retreating, but its eyes never left the doorway. Iron stirred, his massive head rising, a low bellow rumbling from his chest. The calf whimpered, pressing closer, and Iron's gaze softened, his focus returning to the tiny life beside him. Clara's heart clenched. She saw the cost of his fight, the toll of his sacrifice, and knew they were running out of time. "Tom, we need to close those doors," she said. "If the lion gets in, we're done." Tom nodded, his face grim. Together, they shoved the heavy barn doors shut, the wood groaning under their weight. The lion's roar grew louder, its claws scraping against the outside, testing the barrier. Clara secured the latch, her hands shaking but resolute. The barn was safe, for now, but the lion's presence was a ticking clock, and Iron's strength was fading fast. Clara returned to Iron, her hands finishing the bandages, her voice steady. "You're going to make it," she told him, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring, him or herself. The calf stirred, its tiny hoof scraping the straw, and Clara felt a surge of hope. It was fighting, just like Iron, just like her. Tom stood watch at the door, his shotgun ready, his eyes scanning the shadows through a crack in the wood. "That vet better hurry," he said, his voice low. "This barn won't hold forever." Clara nodded, her gaze shifting between Iron and the calf. The buffalo's breaths were labored, his eyes heavy, but he didn't lie down. He stayed upright, a guardian even in his pain. Clara's thoughts drifted to her son, to the nights she'd sat by his side, willing him to live. She had failed then, but she wouldn't fail now. Iron had shown her what it meant to fight, not just for survival, but for something greater. For love, for trust, for a chance at redemption. A faint hum cut through the storm's roar, the distant sound of an engine. Clara's heart leaped. "The vet," she whispered, hope flaring in her chest. She glanced at Tom, who nodded, his expression softening for the first time. "About damn time," he said, but there was no venom in his words. He cracked the door open, peering into the rain, the headlights of an approaching vehicle cutting through the darkness. But as the engine grew louder, so did the lion's roar. The predator sensed the shift, its patience snapping. A deafening crash shook the barn as the lion threw its weight against the doors, the wood splintering under the impact. Iron bellowed, struggling to rise, his wounds tearing open anew. Clara grabbed her rifle, standing between Iron and the door, her heart pounding. Tom raised his shotgun, his face pale but resolute. The headlights grew closer, but so did the lion's assault, its claws raking the weakening doors. Iron's roar matched the storm's fury, a final stand against the wild's wrath. Clara's voice broke as she shouted, "Hold on, Iron! Help's coming!" Would the vet arrive in time to save Iron and the calf? Could Clara and Tom hold off the lion's relentless attack? And what would it cost them to protect this fragile bond against the plains' merciless law? Follow Iron, Clara, and Tom as they face the final test of their courage. Share this story with those who believe in the power of hope against all odds, and tell us, when have you held on to hope in the face of overwhelming danger? The barn shuddered under the mountain lion's relentless assault, its claws tearing at the splintering doors as the storm raged across the Montana plains. Iron stood defiant, his massive frame trembling with pain, his scarred hide slick with blood and rain. The buffalo calf lay curled against him, its tiny chest rising and falling, a fragile spark of life that anchored his resolve. Clara gripped her rifle, her body braced between Iron and the weakening doors, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Tom stood beside her, his shotgun raised, his face pale but resolute. The approaching headlights of the vet's truck cut through the downpour, a beacon of hope in the chaos, but the lion's roars were closer, its hunger a palpable force. Iron's bellow shook the barn, a sound that rivaled the thunder, a final challenge to the predator outside. His wounds were grave, deep gashes from the lion's claws, the coyote's bite still oozing, but his eyes burned with a fire that refused to fade. The calf stirred, its tiny hoof scraping the straw, and Iron nudged it gently, his warmth a shield against the cold. He had fought for this life, chosen it over his own survival, and he would not yield now, not with the barn's walls holding and help so close. Clara's voice was a steady thread in the storm's chaos. "Hold on, Iron," she whispered, her eyes locked on the doors. "Just a little longer." She glanced at Tom, their earlier tensions forgotten in the face of the shared fight. "Tom, when that vet gets here, we need to get those doors open fast." Tom nodded, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "If that lion gets in first, we're done," he said, but his voice carried a new weight, not just fear, but respect for the buffalo's stand. He had seen Iron's sacrifice, his unwavering loyalty to the calf, and it had cracked the walls of his prejudice. "I'll cover you," he added, his eyes meeting Clara's with a rare flicker of trust. The lion's roar crescendoed, its weight slamming against the doors again, the wood cracking under the strain. Clara's heart lurched as a claw broke through, splinters flying. Iron struggled to rise, his legs trembling, his bellow weaker but no less fierce. Clara raised her rifle, aiming through the gap, but before she could fire, the headlights flooded the barn, the truck's engine roaring as it skidded to a stop outside. "Clara!" a voice shouted, a woman's, sharp and urgent. Dr. Lena Harper, the wildlife vet, leaped from the truck, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. Her coat was soaked, her face set with determination as she assessed the scene. "Get those doors open. I need to get in there." Tom hesitated, his eyes on the lion's shadow, but Clara didn't wait. She shoved the doors open, the wood groaning as the lion lunged. Tom fired, the shotgun's blast echoing through the storm, forcing the predator back into the grass. Lena darted inside, her eyes widening at the sight of Iron and the calf. "My God," she breathed, kneeling beside them. "This is extraordinary." Clara grabbed Lena's arm, her voice urgent. "The calves hurt bad, and Iron's worse. Can you save them?" Lena's hands moved swiftly, assessing the calf's wound, then Iron's. "The calf's stable for now," she said, her voice calm but focused. "But this big guy, he's lost a lot of blood. I'll do what I can." Lena worked with practiced precision, her hands steady as she cleaned and stitched Iron's wounds, administering antibiotics from her kit. Iron flinched but remained still, his eyes fixed on the calf, his trust in Lena mirroring the bond he'd formed with Clara. The calf stirred, its breath stronger, responding to Lena's care. Clara knelt beside them, her hand resting on Iron's flank, her voice a soft murmur. "You did it, big fella. You kept her safe." Outside, the lion's growls faded, driven off by Tom's shots and the truck's presence. The storm began to ease, the rain softening to a drizzle, the thunder a distant rumble. Tom lowered his shotgun, his shoulders sagging with relief. He watched Lena work, his expression shifting from doubt to awe. "Never thought I'd see a buffalo let a human do that," he said quietly. "He's different." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening. "He's more than different. He's family." Lena finished her work, her hands bloody but steady. "The calf's going to make it," she said, a faint smile breaking through her focus. "And this big guy, he's a fighter. If he rests, he'll pull through." Iron's head lowered, his breath a heavy sigh as he settled beside the calf, his massive body a shield even in his exhaustion. The calf nuzzled closer, its eyes bright with life, and Clara felt a weight lift from her chest. She thought of her son, of the nights she'd failed to save him, and realized that this moment, this fragile victory, was a redemption she hadn't dared hope for. Days later, the plains glowed under a clear sky, the grass shimmering with the promise of spring. The calf, named Dawn by Lena, stood on wobbly legs in a makeshift pen near Clara's cabin, its wounds healing under the vet's care. Iron, his own wounds bandaged, grazed nearby, his massive form a quiet sentinel. His strength was returning, his scars a testament to his sacrifice, but his eyes held a new peace, a bond forged with the calf and the humans who had stood by him. Clara sat on her porch, watching Iron and Dawn, a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Tom had changed, too. He'd stopped by with supplies for the pen, his gruff demeanor softened by a newfound respect. He'd even started talks with local ranchers about protecting the buffalo herds, a shift that Clara knew Iron had sparked. Lena, inspired by the story, had begun advocating for a wildlife corridor to ensure the herd's safety, her voice carrying Iron's legacy to the world. The plains stretched endless before them, a canvas of life and struggle, but also of hope. Iron's hoofprints marked the earth, a symbol of a fight that transcended species, a reminder that love and sacrifice could bridge even the wildest divides. Clara thought of her son, of the lessons he'd taught her, and smiled. Iron had shown her that the heart could endure, that even in the face of loss, there was something worth fighting for. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Clara stood, her hand resting on the fence. "You changed us all, Iron," she whispered. The buffalo lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, the plains seemed to hold their breath, honoring a bond that would echo through time. "What will you fight for, when the storm comes?" Share Iron's story with those who believe in the power of love and sacrifice, and tell us, when has a single act of courage changed your world?